Democrats, Republicans, record high inflation, a housing market which is unattainable to most, and an economy which looks to be growing. But when you peel back the layers, the real people that make up that economy are suffering, mostly because of high prices and low wages. Whose fault is this? What caused inflation this time around? And whose job is it to get us out of this mess? And one other question I want to try and answer is which political party, if either, is better suited to get us out of this mess? Because election year is right around the corner, and these decisions matter because each and every single one of you are a voter. Now, I do not want to get political on this channel. This is an economic and personal finance-based channel. So what I'm going to try to do here is to cover the facts and present data and allow you to make the choice that is right for you. So let's do just that. My name is Derek, and I got my degree in finance, so you don't have to. Let's try to piece this very complex subject and this very complex problem together. Now, before we do that, you have to understand a few things. First and foremost, anytime that we have economic trouble or economic problems, there is always an inflection point. When you look through history, for example, the dot-com bust, the 2008 mortgage-backed security crisis, which led to the Great Recession, and most recently, 2020, and the pandemic, and the way that the government handled the response to the pandemic can kind of be the inflection point or the trigger or the spark that caused the most recent round of economic problems that we are facing. So in order to answer those questions, we first and foremost have to go back to 2020 and figure out what set in motion what we're experiencing here today. Now, one other thing I want to touch on. Before we do that, when you look through history and when you analyze the data, what you end up noticing is that regardless of political party, Democrat or Republican, and we're talking about the executive branch, right? So the president, not necessarily Congress right now, but when we talk about the executive branch, Democrat or Republican, whoever's leading the country, there does not seem to be much drastic difference in inflation, right? Inflation tends to hover between 3 to 3.5% regardless of which political party is in power. So on a standard year, it doesn't seem to matter too much. At least that's what the data tells us. But 2020 wasn't a standard year. 2020, we experienced a pandemic, which may or may not have been unforeseen. The point is, the way that the government responded is more important than the actual trigger itself, which is the global pandemic. Now, we also have to understand that in 2020, we had Republican executive leadership, but we had a Democrat majority in Congress. So we had what is known as a split government. Now, you can argue whether the executive branch is truly the leader of the country or whether Congress has more power to actually shape the nation. That is up for debate, but it is a good argument and potentially a topic for a future video. The point is, they usually act in conjunction to pass emergency bills. And that is exactly what happened in 2020 with about $2 trillion of pandemic or COVID relief. I don't even know if I can say that word here on YouTube. That was initially passed. Now, this was put together by Congress and it was signed by the president. Now, we have to understand that I guess the way that the government wanted to respond depended kind of on political or party lines, whereas the left-leaning policy was more to shut down the nation, to close businesses, etc. The Republican stance, while it didn't come to fruition, was more so to leave the economy open, and there was a lot of pushback on actually closing businesses, etc. And Democrats kind of wanted to control what happened. Republicans kind of wanted to leave it on a person-by-person basis on whether people wanted to risk getting sick or not. That's kind of standard. Now, here's the thing. There is what actually took place, and then there is the hypothetical. The country did shut down, and the country did close businesses, and the country did lock down for many months. Now, the other option was to not do any of those things. The problem is that is a hypothetical, and we will never know how that would have played out. At first glance, you might say, well, it would have stopped a lot of the economic problems. Perhaps, perhaps not. I guess it would depend on how that affected the actual pandemic itself. The point of the matter is that is what happened. The country was locked down, and I think most of us can say that those were more left-leaning policies. The fact of the matter is that it was a bipartisan decision to inject trillions of dollars into the economy, not once, but twice. And as of 2023, about $5 to $6 trillion of economic relief, or what is known as quantitative easing, has been injected into the market, mostly due because of 2020. Now, we have to take a pause here and we have to kind of understand what injecting money, or as everyone likes to know it, as printing money actually means, because I think that there is a misconception on what printing money actually means. When the US government injects money in the form of quantitative easing or of COVID relief, it is not actually printing dollar bills. What is going on is that the US government is issuing, the US Treasury is issuing Treasury bonds. So it is selling Treasury bonds and it is collecting money. So it is adding to its debt. Okay. Now, it usually does this to fund government operations. Because of 2020 and 2021, there were a couple of rounds of relief. Now, this relief took place as PPP, which is Paycheck Protection Programs. These were loans to businesses directly. And it also took place as payments to the general U.S. population in the form of relief payments. Remember the $750, I think $1,200 payments that we received. The fact of the matter is the U.S. government does not print money necessarily. It borrows money, and then in this case, it injected it directly into the economy through loans and through payments. Now, we also have to understand that when the Fed, because the Fed is another part of this whole situation, the Federal Reserve, usually the government, the U.S. government, lends money to you, to I, and to foreign investors in the form of Treasury bonds. In 2020, that wasn't necessarily the case. The Federal Reserve was the main purchaser of bonds by the U.S. Treasury. So you have money that is being injected into the economy, and at the end of the day, we basically printed $4 to $5 trillion over the last couple of years. There were some numbers that were being thrown out there that 80% of the U.S. circulating money supply was created in the last 3 years. That's not necessarily the case. There were some adjustments to what we actually calculate as M2 money. There's M0, M1, M2, M3, and M4 money. Okay. So when you're calculating M2 money, there were some changes that were made that made it seem like more money was created than actually was. With that said, it's still not great. About 20% of the money supply has been created every year since 2020, I believe. That's an insane amount of money. Now, this took place under two presidents, right? We have first a Republican-led executive branch, and then from 2021 to now, we have a Democrat-led executive branch, all right? Now, Congress is a different story. Under 2020, it was a Democrat majority. Now, basically what we've had is for the last 4 years, we've had a split government. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that regardless of political party, inflation tends to be about the same. When a pandemic or an event like the pandemic happens, the two different political aisles tend to want to react differently, right? In this case, the conservative aisle wanted to leave the country open and wanted to leave businesses open and functioning. The liberal or the left-leaning aisle wanted to close businesses or create lockdowns. And perhaps there were people on either side of the aisle who were more moderate or somewhere in the middle. Again, I don't like to get political, but everyone has different political beliefs and everyone has different ideologies of how best to run the country. The fact of the matter is, when we look back at 2020, the major or the inflection point that led to what is going on right now is the printing of money. The printing of money and the insane amount of borrowing that took place in order to fund the programs like quantitative easing and COVID relief. At the end of the day, that is the main cause of the problems that we are facing. And it was, in a sense, a bipartisan approach. Now, there can be arguments that a full Republican government may have handled things differently. The problem is we do not know how that would have played out. And we do not know if later on we would have had to shut down the economy at a larger scale or not. We have no idea because it did not happen. Now, we can make assumptions, and you're allowed to make whatever assumption you want, as am I. That's what makes this country great, is the differing of opinions, etc. But I want to talk about the facts. The fact of the matter is a ton of money was printed, and any time that you increase money supply, you are going to have inflation. Now we've kind of touched on what caused this issue. So the other two things that we have to touch on is which political party, if either, is best to get us out of this situation. And we also need to touch on how to best fight inflation. And the third lens, because we're looking at it between left and right or blue and red, but there is a third party, and that is the Federal Reserve. So which political party, if any, can get us out of this mess? This is important to you because an election year is right around the corner, and, well, that alone should be enough. But also, we need to understand that your voice matters because your choice matters because your vote matters. So let's try to break that down, and let's also talk about the Federal Reserve. Now, when we try to analyze which party is best to get us out of this situation, we have to look at their policies. Now, they are very different in regards to running the economy. Democratic policies tend to be a lot of printing money, right? But also raising taxes. Now, on the other side of the coin, Republicans tend to want to cut costs, right? Budget cuts, but they also tend to want to loosen or lower taxes. So you have left-leaning policies which are increasing taxes and increasing spending, and you have right-leaning policies which are lowering or budget cuts and lowering taxes. Now, we can argue where the tax cuts would go. We can also argue on the other side, if we increase taxes, where they would go. The point of the matter is, each one of those things do the complete opposite. When you raise taxes, you lower money supply, which should in turn lower inflation. Modern monetary theory says that. Now, on the other side of the coin, when you spend money or when you borrow money and you inject that into the economy through social programs, etc., that can also increase inflation. So you have two policies that contradict each other. On the other side of the coin, you have the same thing just backward. Republicans usually want to cut costs, right? When you cut costs, it's the same as the other side. So Democrats want to increase costs, that causes inflation. If you cut costs, theoretically you can lower inflation. But Republicans also usually want to cut taxes. When you cut taxes, regardless of where on the income level you cut those taxes, when you cut taxes, you are increasing money supply in the market. So either side, it's interesting to see, but either side can both cause and shrink inflation. They just want to do it in opposite ways. So theoretically, what needs to happen, and a lot of people aren't going to like this, and I'm not calling for this, okay? I have, luckily for you and I have zero control and zero power into what the government does. I have no power except casting my singular vote. But theoretically, to get inflation under control, what government can do is raise taxes. And when interest rates do not work, the next thing is raising taxes. Now, most people do not want that. Most people do not like the way that feels. Same with the other side of the coin. With Republicans, budget cuts, it depends on where those budget cuts are coming from. Usually the budget cuts are coming from social programs, which also most people do not like. So either side of the political aisle, you're going to have people who are pissed off at what's going on. Luckily, there is a third party involved in the fight to inflation, or the fight against inflation, and that is the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve fights inflation primarily by one main metric, which is raising or lowering interest rates. In essence, increasing or decreasing the money supply. And that is what we've seen happen so far. Inflation didn't seem to do anything till 2021, late 2021, 22, and then inflation went through the roof. Okay. The Federal Reserve has responded by raising interest rates, and that does seem to be working. So you have to understand that the real, I don't want to say superhero, the real main fighter of inflation is the Federal Reserve. And when you look at the fight against inflation, no matter if there's a Republican or a Democrat in power, the Federal Reserve is the one who takes or who bears the brunt of fighting inflation. Now, the Federal Reserve is supposed to be a nonpartisan institution. Its main job is to control money supply, to keep inflation at bay. So when we go into this next election cycle, there's going to be a lot of talk about inflation because it is a major problem and a major topic. And of course, Republicans are going to say, look who's leading the country. It's the Democrats' fault. And Democrats will say, look who was leading the country when, it first happened. And they're going to blame Republicans. So each one is going to blame the other. And we have to understand that is politics. We have to sort through the noise and we have to actually see what matters. And what matters is when you print a ton of money, you're going to get inflation. You also have to understand that the main fighter against inflation is the Federal Reserve with raising interest rates. The problem is that in any case, the medicine hurts. There are side effects to the medicine because the medicine is constricting money supply. It doesn't matter how it's done, either by raising taxes, by cutting costs, or by raising interest, the federal funds rate. It does not matter which way it happens. When you constrict money supply, you have a chance of shrinking the economy, and it causes pain. Okay, and it also causes pain for homeowners or for potential homeowners in the form of interest rate hikes for mortgages, car loan borrowers who want to buy a new car. Anyone who is borrowing on credit, when you constrict money supply, it is harder to get a loan, which usually means higher interest rates. So the medicine hurts, but in either case, in order to get inflation under control, that is what's going to happen. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is two things. One, it was a bipartisan effort that caused inflation in the first place because it was a bipartisan agreement to inject trillions upon trillions of dollars into the economy. Now, yes, maybe there was some more pushback from one side. The point is, when you look at history, Republicans and Democrats both spend too much money. Our government spends too much money. And the whole goal with politics is to divide the nation, in a sense, because a divided nation is easier to conquer. That sounds bad, but it also is just the fact that when you have certain beliefs, you're going to naturally group with people who have similar beliefs. So you get this two-party system. But when we look at the economic problems, a lot of them come from the fact that we have overspent as a nation year after year after year. And regardless of which party is in power, there tends to be overspending. And overspending leads to inflation. Period. Now, when we look at 2020 to now, there has been a gross overspending and a gross injection of money supply into the market. And it has been a bipartisan effort to do that. So when you look at whose fault it is, I don't think there is a clear winner and loser. I think that the government in general has acted in a way that has basically caused short-term gains with long-term problems. Short-term gains in 2020 and 2021 to try to starve off or stave off economic collapse, and long-term problems which we are facing 3 years later, which is ridiculous inflation, an inflated money supply, a real estate market that is unattainable, etc. Now, who is better suited to get us out of this problem, Republicans or Democrats? Personally, I don't think it fucking matters. I think that the Fed is going to take the brunt of the job when it comes to fighting inflation, and I think that that is exactly what they're doing by raising interest rates. So I hope this video was informative, and I hope it cleared up the reason we got here. I hope it also helped you understand money supply better, because as a nation, we don't necessarily print money and just print new dollar bills. Most dollar bills that exist are just digitally existing on a spreadsheet in banks. And the way that money supply gets injected into the market is the US government basically sells treasury bonds, or the Federal Reserve injects money into the banks, again, by buying bonds. Remember, the Federal Reserve can buy bonds and inject money. The Federal Reserve can also sell bonds, right, and take money out of circulation. So the Federal Reserve controls money supply, but the US government can also inject money supply by printing money, quote unquote, which is the Treasury selling bonds. All right. So policies matter. Republicans or Democrats, who's elected as leadership matters, because depending on how much money is printed every single year, printed, I keep saying that word, I think you understand what it means by now. Depending on how much money is printed every single year, that is going to affect inflation. Now, as long as real wealth grows by an equal or larger amount, inflation doesn't really matter. The problem is 2020 to now, real wealth has not grown at the rate that inflation has. So you have this issue where people feel poorer, even if they're employed. There is a very low unemployment rate, but people still feel poor because real wealth has not kept up with inflation. So political party does matter, because each party has differing beliefs on how to inject money and how to make the economy grow. I don't necessarily know if one is better than the other. I don't necessarily know if one or the other benefits the regular American. And that's what we have to understand. Politics tends to divide us as a nation, but in reality, it is regular Americans versus special interests. And that's what you really have to understand. It is not you versus me, or Republican versus Democrat. It is regular Americans versus the special interests of a few. And that is where the real struggle for power actually takes place. So when you look at Republicans and you look at Democrats, do not look at them as the enemy. Look at them as your brothers and sisters who view life differently, and understand that in reality, the real problem is when special interests of a few go herd before the interest of many. If government listens to the special interests of a few over the interest of many, there is a problem. And that has been a recurring problem with the US government for many, many years. In regards to the fight against inflation, the Fed is going to take the bulk of that, and it doesn't fucking matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat in leadership. The Fed is going to do what the Fed does, which is keep interest rates high until inflation comes down to a reasonable level. And if that doesn't work, they're going to have to find another way to remove money supply from the market. Unfortunately, that means, in modern monetary theory, that usually means raising taxes. I don't know if that's going to happen. Hopefully that doesn't have to happen, and hopefully the Fed does its job and inflation comes under control. I hope this video was helpful. I hope this video was informative. I hope this video didn't piss too many of you off. Like I said, I don't want to be political here on this channel. I just want to state facts and tell you how it is, and you can make your own decision and you can come to your own conclusions. I love to have discussions, as long as those discussions stay civil in the comments below. You are more than welcome to disagree with me. I do not have a chip on my shoulder. I am not God, and I'm not smarter than other people. I'm just a human being who's giving you my perspective on things from my experience, as well as from my degree in finance. But that is all. It's nothing more, nothing less, and I will never have a chip on my shoulder here in this channel. I just want to provide you with information and come to the best of your conclusions. You can do that on your own. Again, my name is Derek. I got my degree in finance. You don't have to. I love you guys. I love personal finance. If you love personal finance and world economics broken down in videos like this where I just have a conversation with you, then you're in the right place, because it's all that we do here. New videos come out usually every single Tuesday, sometimes Thursdays or Friday if there's a major event. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. It helps the channel tremendously. And please turn on the bell notifications so you don't miss the next video. I love you guys, and I will see you in the next one.